Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of my Pop Dissected Podcast. For this episode, I wanted to go more in depth about the music industry. Upon doing some research, I found this really interesting article entitled 5 Tips Every Artist Must Know Before Signing Their First Record Deal. I found this article on the website Sonic Bids by writer Matt Vilmer. This was posted in 2015, so the 5 reasons that are listed in this article may be different now. But I thought it would be interesting if we went through these 5 tips together, and I gave my 2 cents on why these tips are so important. The first tip is watch out for contracts with initial terms lasting more than 1 year. So by this they're saying most recording contracts are about a year long. And this would make sense. You put out an album, potentially go on tour that year, and your label sees how you perform. And you could do very well, or you could absolutely tank. But one interesting point brought up by this tip is they say, you'll never know where your career will take you, and it's important to keep your options open. If you have a record label that lasts super long, and we've seen this with so many artists of our time, you're stuck. You have to put out efforts, and your label potentially may not invest in you. They could be taking most of your money, not promoting you, and basically you end up putting out music that no one's listening to. Because while music is not about the charts, it's not about the sales, you have to think. As an artist, you want people to listen to your music. You want people to hear your stories. And if you're locked into a contract that's longer than you expected it to be, your label can basically hold you hostage, demanding you to make money for them. And that's just no way to have a career. So, if your contract is just set at an initial year, you have the ability to move on to another label, do something else entirely, and not be trapped in one place. And I think this is an important point for literally any field or career you go into. You have to make sure you're able to keep your options open, and if you put all your eggs in one basket, yes, it could absolutely work out for you, but it could backfire in unprecedented and unexpected ways. So the second tip, which is something I've never heard before, states, get a release commitment. And he explains this tip by saying, without a release commitment from your record label, you'll have no guarantees that the label will actually do the work to get your album produced, packaged, and distributed to the public for sale. So for further explanation, if you don't get one of these, you can record, write, produce the album that the label wants from you, but they have the option to not release it. And if you don't get one of these commitments, you're stuck in your contract with an album you can't release. Another point that's brought up in this tip is that it's important to negotiate a minimum marketing spend, which would be an addendum to the release commitment. So by getting those, your label now has to actually release your album, but they also have a budget for how much they're going to put into promotion. Because if you don't get one of those, your label could either just not put out your album and you're stuck with them, or they could put it out and it gets no sales, you make no money, and basically that kind of ties into point 1. You're held hostage and you can't do anything while they're taking your money, and you're not making any at all. So the third tip says, make sure your royalty rate is reasonable. And the most standout point of information from this says, some record labels prey upon unsuspecting artists by offering relatively large upfront signing bonuses, giving their artists an initial feeling of success. While I feel like part of this is a no-brainer, maybe it isn't to people who are not familiar with the industry. This is something I'm learning about too. But I feel like if you're getting a lot of money up front, well, that's a way to convince you to sign to that label and get a deal. You see all those zeros on a check and you're encouraged to. But that's when you have to read the fine print and see what's really going on in your contract. On the low end, royalty rate is at 5%. On the high end, it's 18%. Which I think is interesting because I always assumed that royalty rates for artists were a lot higher than this. When you think about when songs are used in movies, performed live, other people cover them, other people release them, etc. Bottom line, this is a really important thing because you could get a ton of money up front, and then as your career continues, that's all you have because you're not getting any royalties for when your songs are used. I think we can gather at this point, labels, yes, they want to work with you, but at the end of the day, they want to make as much money as possible. And if you get nothing, well, they're definitely fine with that probably. So going off of that third point, the fourth point is about watching out for hidden royalty deductions. And here it says that some record labels sneak in enormous royalty deductions that all but guarantee you'll never receive a royalty check. And what I find so interesting in this is it says they can take deductions off your hotel, travel, car rentals, meals, and stuff you do. which makes me think that would likely be stuff you may be doing while you're working or you're on tour. So while there are hidden deductions, there are standard ones that are commonplace, such as recording cost, video production cost, and the cost of creating a CD and DVD packaging. So most of the normal deductions are during the process of making your actual album. So this is why it's important that your royalty rate is reasonable in case there are these hidden deductions. Because if your royalty rate is low and then you have deductions on top of that, you're definitely not making any money. So the final tip in this article says, make sure you can audit the record label on royalty payments. It goes on further to explain the typical audit provision gives the artist the ability to hire a third-party auditor to go through the record label's books and records and make sure they're paying the artist what they're entitled to. These final 3 tips really all tie in together because it's about what an artist can make through the work they're putting in. Because if you're not hiring someone to check with the record label, they can lie about what you're getting paid, or they can say that you're lying. All in all, I think it's so interesting what goes into an actual record deal. You hear about these tips and you have to wonder, how much else is there that artists have to go through? And then when we think about our favorite artists, hey, they've probably had to do every single one of these steps. And it's amazing to think artists who are struggling with their label and going through difficult times, did they not take these steps? Or was their label able to find a way to screw with them? Maybe it's the price of fame. Maybe it's innocent people getting blackballed. Who knows? But I think the lesson here is that it's so important, whatever career field you're going into, you need to check the fine print and make sure your worth matches up to the hours you're putting in. Being a recording artist isn't easy because you think about the entire process. It's coming up with an idea, sitting down with others and writing songs. Then it's recording the songs, and then it's going over the production, and then it's mixing the songs. And then it's making music videos, and then it's going on tour. There's so much that is involved in being an artist. I wouldn't be able to gauge if it's more than a 40-hour-a-week type of job. But the truth is, these artists do work hard. And when we think about eras and periods where artists have been super successful, imagine the work they've been putting in. I'm curious to know, do you think there are any artists that have worked extremely hard and have never gotten what they deserved, whether it came from their label or their royalties, their payments, or even the general public? I'd love to hear what y'all think. So with that, we conclude this episode of the Pop Dissected Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.